In the last video, we started talking about factoring polynomials, and we looked at factoring using the greatest common factor. We want it to be a habit to always check for a greatest common factor first. It makes the factoring easier, but we want to move on right now and talk about factoring by grouping. Now, we factor by grouping when we have a polynomial with 4 terms, and there are some steps that we want to follow here. The first step is to find the greatest common factor of the first 2 terms. So if we look at our first example here, x is the greatest common factor of the first 2 terms. Next step, we want to look at the greatest common factor of the last 2 terms. So when we look at our last 2 terms here, we see that the greatest common factor is +2. We always want to have a sign with our number here. That'll help us remember to factor correctly. Now we want to factor those using that greatest common factor. So we keep our greatest common factor and divide each term. 4x squared divided by x is 4x. X divided by x is +1. Keep our greatest common factor again and divide each term. 8x divided by 2 is 4x, plus 2 divided by 2 is +1. We see we have our greatest common factor, 4x plus 1. Leaving a quotient of x plus 2. Now remember that order doesn't matter. We could write this as x plus 2 times 4x plus 1. Either one of those is correct. Let's try this one together. Look at the greatest common factor of the first 2 terms. Find the greatest common factor of the last 2 terms. Now, whenever there is a negative sign here, we're going to have a negative common factor. So in this case, -6. Write down your greatest common factor. Divide each term. 5xy divided by 5x is y. Minus 15x divided by 5x is -3. Write down your greatest common factor, including the sign. -6y divided by -6 is +y. 18 divided by -6 is -3. Now we see that y minus 3 is common. And we're multiplying it by the quotient 5x minus 6. Pause your video, try the next one. We saw 3x was the greatest common factor for the first 2 terms. Write it down. 6x squared divided by 3x is 2x, plus 9x divided by 3x is +3. We found -5 to be the greatest common factor of the last 2 terms. Write it down with its sign. -10x divided by -5, +2x. -15 divided by -5, +3. Now we see we have a greatest common factor of 2x plus 3. Multiplying our quotient, 3x minus 5. Here are 2 more questions. Give these a try. So for question 3, we found 7y to be the greatest common factor for the first 2 terms. minus 2 to be the greatest common factor for the last two terms. X plus y is common, and we multiplied x plus y by the quotient. In question 4, y was the greatest common factor of the first two terms. Oh, I forgot to write my plus sign there. Plus 3 was the greatest common factor of the last two terms. We found that x squared plus 2 is a common factor, and we multiplied it by the quotient. Now, sometimes you're going to note in Pearson that you're asked to factor completely. This is important because it usually is reminding you that you should look for a greatest common factor. So when I look at question 1, I see that 2 is common in 10, 30, negative 12, and 36. I see that every term contains x and every term contains y. So we have a greatest common factor here of 2xy. Remember, when you factor using the greatest common factor, you write it down and multiply it by the quotient. I feel like something was missing here. I thought I changed this and now it's not changed. It should be. Let's just change a few of these exponents here. Hopefully it'll be changed in your notes already. This one should be x squared. So this will just be x. This one should just be x. So there will be no x left here. And I think I had a y cubed here. So yours will be a little bit different than mine, I hope. Oops, and then I didn't finish it. Plus 18y squared. Okay. Now notice we've been talking about factoring by grouping. We said we use factoring by grouping when we have 4 terms. We have 4 terms in the brackets here. Is there a greatest common factor for the first 2 terms? There is. Is there a greatest common factor for the last 2 terms? There is here as well. So that means if I factor that, I have 5x times 1 minus 3y. And inside the brackets here, 1 minus 3y. Now I can't forget about my 2xy. So we're going to keep that here. 2xy is multiplying all of this. But if I look inside those brackets, I see that 1 minus 3y is common. Multiply that by the quotient, 5x minus 6y, and our greatest common factor. Pause your video, try the next one. So you first checked for a greatest common factor and found that it was 3y. But now we see we have 4 terms and we should try factoring by grouping. 3x was common in the first 2 terms. Negative 5 was common in the last 2 terms, but we remembered to keep our greatest common factor outside. Now we see that we have 2x plus 3 common, multiplied by the quotient, 3x minus 5, and we still have that greatest common factor, 3y. There's a lot to practice in there as well. So you should have noticed at the end of your notes here, there are some review questions. These are good exam review questions, and the solutions you should find posted on your class Moodle page.